Good morning, everybody. Wake up. It's 9 a.m. on the West Coast, 6 p.m. in Berlin and London and Paris. Hopefully they're joining us. I am very excited to both fill your stomachs with food and or libations out in Europe, and also fill your brains with what we're going to talk about. When I first saw this talk presented and Diane said, hey, would you like to be a sponsor? I jumped all over it because the first three bullet points went right to my heart. So Mike's going to talk to us about distributing authority, processing information effectively and efficiently with some systems, and really just helping to build the code, if you will, in day-to-day operations between what we do every day and our strategy and building a culture. So all three of those things are really exciting, and it's something I've personally been experimenting with at Mozilla, and I didn't know there were experts like Mike out here that were actually actively coaching people how to do this every day. So, you know, whether we're talking about our internal self-service travel systems or how we did our Mountain View space with collaborating and actually collecting feedback, which Mike's going to talk about, some of these ideas are very powerful. So I'm going to shut up and let Mike get up here. He's going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then we'll do about a 20-minute Q&A. So turn your brains on, listen to Mike, fire away a ton of questions, and let's have a good conversation. Mike.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my name is Mike Arauz. I'm really, really happy to be here and excited to talk about this stuff and talk about it with a company like Mozilla that I think is actually doing a lot of these things right, and a lot of this stuff is kind of baked into the DNA of the company in a great way. And yet one of the most interesting things to me about this stuff is that even companies like yourselves and companies who have this kind of mindset and many of these practices baked into the DNA of their culture still mostly are doing it by instinct rather than by design. And I think that there's an important difference between the two, and you can get even more out of it once you start thinking about it a little bit more intentionally. So I work at a company called August. We're based in New York City, and we work with all kinds of different companies, big and small, for-profits, non-profits, companies in the tech industry, companies in more traditional industries. And we help these companies, we coach them, and we advise them on how they can adapt to these new ways of working and organizing. So what I'm going to talk about today is, as Jim said, we'll get into it a little bit more, but I believe that there's a revolution kind of bubbling up in organizations today. I love this Louis C.K. quote because I think it's a good, it really expresses what so many people are feeling in our work lives these days. On the one hand, everything is awesome, and especially being here where you guys are in Menlo Park and Silicon Valley, you look around, you see these amazing things. It's never been easier for anybody to bring an idea to market, to bring a company to scale. Firefox being a perfect example of like how quickly a group of people were able to go from an idea of that to being a huge player in the market and to displace or disrupt an incumbent like Microsoft. Great example of how awesome things can be and how fast things can move. And yet at the same time, inside most companies today, those kind of examples, those kinds of iconic 21st century success stories are actually unfortunately the rare exception. Most companies and most people inside of most companies are having a very different experience. On the one hand, productivity has never been higher, while at the same time, it's never been harder to get a return on your investment. So people are working harder. Companies are spending more on R&D and getting less and less in return for it. It's also never been harder to stay in business. The average lifespan of a company on the S&P 500 back in 1958 was over 60 years. Once you got there, you could expect to have a pretty good run for a pretty decent amount of time. and today it's just 15 years, and it keeps dropping. So the market that most companies are working in is getting more and more competitive. And then inside, what it feels like for individual employees inside most organizations, this is a global study from Gallup about people being engaged in the workplace. And the sad fact here is only 13% of employees globally are reporting feeling engaged in their work. The vast majority of them are either feeling not engaged or actively disengaged. A quarter of people actually feeling actively disengaged, potentially working, explicitly in a counterproductive way to the company or the organization's mission or interests. And a lot of times when I share these stats, especially in older organizations been around, but even newer ones too, people feel these frustrations. And here's why I think it's so common, and what the way that I look at it, the way that I think about it. This is the kind of core underlying reason driving this tension that we're feeling. This tension between how our organizations work and how the world works outside of our organizations. So on the left here it says certain. On the right it says uncertain. This is a spectrum, and I assert that you could put pretty much any kind of work that is done somewhere along this spectrum, from the most certain and most routine tasks to the least certain, the most unroutine tasks on the right. So on the left, the certain, the routine work, it's kind of classic, like maybe assembly line stuff where the way to do it correctly is well known. It also includes things like basic accounting, or a lawyer drafting some basic legal agreement. And then on the right-hand side, really exciting things that are happening in the uncertain end of the spectrum might be things like trying to cure cancer or inventing a self-driving car. But it also includes things like choosing the best new IT system for a mid-size insurance company, because that's also a really hard and very highly uncertain, highly unpredictable thing to do. So this is all the work that exists lives somewhere along this spectrum. Now here's where it gets interesting. So what are computers good at? Computers, artificial intelligence, robotics, software. Computers are especially good at the most routine things. And that's where pretty much all applications of computers has started, at that extreme end of the spectrum. And slowly but surely, or maybe not so slowly, but very steadily has been, computers have been eating tasks and eating jobs from the left, moving towards the right over time. And that seems to be accelerating what computers can do, what kinds of tasks computers can do. And at the other end of the spectrum, what are humans good at? What do humans need to be good at in order to create value in today's world? Well, humans are much, much better at computers, at the most uncertain, most creative, most collaborative tasks, the stuff that lives on the right hand of this spectrum, the uncertain side. Humans are really good at that stuff and much better at it than computers. And yet, most organizations that we work inside of, the way that organizations are designed and optimized is for that certain end of the spectrum. And that's because the way that most organizations operate and the rules that govern how most organizations operate was designed over 100 years ago for a world that no longer exists. The dominant operating model inside most organizations today is inspired by early 20th century thinking based on an industrial model, going all the way back to the Ford Motor Company, the early days of the railroad systems, railroad conglomerates. Like, if you look at the organizational chart for one of the big railroad companies from the early 1900s, it looks almost identical to every organizational chart you see of any company of any significant scale today. No one has really significantly rethought or challenged the assumptions about why we organize the way that we do inside of big companies. And there is a good reason for that 100 years ago. You could create incredible amounts of value by being able to figure out how to do the most routine, the most predictable work slightly better, to do it a little bit faster, to do it a little bit more reliably, to do it a little bit more efficiently. You could create incredible amounts of value. But today, you can't create value there. You can only create value there by building software or building computers that does that better than human beings do. But human beings themselves can barely create any additional value in that space. But human beings can create huge amounts of value at the other end of the spectrum. And so what I argue is that organizations need to flip their mental model of what they should be organizing for, what they should be optimizing for. They should be organizing and optimizing to enable the human beings who live inside the organizations to be really good at, really capable of the most uncertain, the least routine, most collaborative, most creative work. So to a good frame of reference for what that shift means, at a really simplistic level, you can think about it as a shift from organizing to execute to organizing to learn. And we'll talk more specifically about what that looks like. But there are lots of organizations out there who are doing it, both ones that have been around for a while and have been thinking about new models of organizing for a while, kind of under the radar, companies like Morningstar, Gore, Buurtzorg, which is in the Netherlands. And then, the ones that we often talk about as kind of leading iconic examples of 21st century companies are also doing this. And nobody's getting it perfect. There are lots of different variables, and it's still early days about how to apply these ways of working at scale. But there are lots of companies who are kind of leading on this front, and where our work and these practices get their inspiration from. These new ways of working that I'm talking about go by many labels. Agile and lean startup, something that you're all probably very familiar with. The B Corp movement, Benefit Corp movement is also related to this. Holacracy, something we'll talk about a little bit more later. Responsive organizations, exponential organizations, reinventing organizations, all this stuff. So these are slightly different flavors, but when you look closely at them, they have a huge amount of overlap and alignment in the underlying principles and practices that define them. And so we've looked across these organizations who are succeeding and are figuring out how to succeed in this very uncertain world that we live in. And we've looked at these different frameworks and models that are bubbling up. And at August, the way that we think about defining this new way of working basically boils down to these 5 underlying principles, these core principles. So we're going to talk about 3 of them in more detail, and we're going to get into the details about, so what does this actually look like in practice inside organizations like yourselves. But before I do, I just want to go through this list. So be purpose-driven is number 1, having a really clear sense of purpose and using that purpose and that mission to guide decision-making and to determine how teams and people are organized within the company at every level is something that you see consistently in these kinds of more adaptive and responsive organizations. Design for networks. We're going to talk about this in more detail, but that network mindset, companies who are leading in this way have more connections between employees within the organization and more connections between people inside the organization and people outside the organization. Distribute authority, so giving people, empowering people within the organization to do what they think is best in service of the company's purpose or mission. Learn by doing, a bias towards experimentation, a bias towards evidence-based decision-making. If we're not sure what might happen, then the default is to go and try something and find out what the impact or the effect is. It's also about constant iteration and experimentation. Agile lives squarely in that spot. And then last, default to open, this bias towards transparency and enabling information to flow freely and easily as much as possible within the organization and to whatever extent you can outside the organization as well. So we're going to dive deep on these 3, design for networks, distribute authority, and default to open. So first up, design for networks. So as I said, It's about connectedness within the organization and connectedness between the organization and people outside the organization. This is one area, especially when you think about how an organization is connected to people outside the organization, where Mozilla is absolutely a global leader. And using adopting an open source approach to your product development is grounded on this thinking. It's grounded on this mental model where it doesn't do us any good to try to manage or control who has access to help us pursue our mission. The more we enable more people to do that, the better off we'll be in pursuing our mission. It's also about internally. And on the internal side, I think holacracy. So let me back up and tell you what holacracy is for those of you who haven't heard of it. If you have heard of it, most likely you've heard of it in the context of Zappos using it. So holacracy is a management technology or management system for how a company can organize and decide who does what and keep track of who does what. That's the most simplistic way to put it. So the reason why I want to talk about it here in Design for Networks, one of the really interesting innovations, I think, in holacracy is this basic idea of separating, the way that they put it, separating roles from souls. What that means is we talk about, and in organizations who practice this, they separate the roles and how they are defined from the people who fill them. In most organizations, those two are conflated. Each person has a title, and whatever their title is kind of a catch-all for any of the roles that they might be filling. Of course, the reality is that all of us wear many hats. We fill many different roles in many different teams. And we also trade roles. 1 month or a couple months, one person might be the right person to do something. A couple months later, somebody else is the right person to do it. So in holacracy, those two things are separated. And every single role inside the organization is defined explicitly in terms of its own unique purpose or mission, defined specifically in terms of its domain that it has control over, defined specifically in terms of accountabilities that it has, and defined specifically in terms of specific metrics. And the metrics doesn't have to be something complicated, just whatever is most relevant for that particular role. The accountabilities and the purpose are really the most essential pieces. And accountabilities are defined as ongoing expectations that you have. So think about a team that you're a part of, right? And think about all the different tasks that you fill. What you would do is you would sit down with your team and you would itemize all those different roles and those accountabilities, and you would actually record them into some kind of shared digital document. So you would list, all right, here are all the different roles. Who fills those roles? I fill this role and this role. This role has these specific accountabilities. This other role has these other specific accountabilities. And every team would do that. All of the roles and across all of the teams would all be recorded in the same digital system. And I emphasize the recording in the shared digital system because that's where things get interesting from a kind of organizational and kind of macro perspective across the whole company. Because once you have it in some kind of digital format, then you can edit it, you can share it, you can copy and paste it. And the editing part is one of the most powerful things. Once you've put all of your roles and accountabilities into this format, then you can get together every month, review what's on that list, and change it together without having to wait for some boss to come in and tell you what new roles are going to be added or taken away from your team. The team can decide for itself how to change and edit the roles that are a part of their team. And no longer do you have these top-down, extremely painful, infrequent reorgs, company-wide reorgs, which, as we all know, worst-case scenario, they happen. They happen like every 3 years, but more and more often these days, we're hearing that they're happening, every 2 years or every 1 year. It seems like. And the reason why they're so painful is they take a huge amount of time to just figure out what we're going to do, right? So it takes 6 months to a year to decide how we're going to reorg. And people put so much time into that because it has such broad implications. It's going to change so much of the organization. So we really want to be sure that we get it right. But of course, we all know that as soon as we start to roll it out, it becomes outdated, right? And by the time we actually ship whatever that instructions are for the reorg, it's time to reorg again. And that's the reality, is that, of course, we should always be reorganizing, and it shouldn't be so painful. And just like you do with most software releases, it's not painful to issue a minor software update because it's expected that you're always iterating on it, that you're always improving it. So the same thing should happen with your organization. And by digitizing the roles and accountabilities that you have of each other, that allows you to continually edit your organization all the time. So second, distribute authority. So again, this is about handing over authority, handing over autonomy, empowering people to use their own best judgment to do whatever it is that they need to do to get their work done, to push the company towards its mission. 3 interesting examples. So I want to reference Medium here because Medium has been practicing holacracy. This idea of empowering employees to do what they think is best is baked into holacracy and something that they've been using at Medium. Although Medium is trying to think about how they can potentially evolve beyond it because holacracy is not perfect, and Zappos is finding that out as well, even at their scale. So Morningstar is a tomato processing company. We're not talking about the investment, the financial company. We're talking about the tomato processing company. And they are, this may or may not be surprising to you, but it was when I first heard about it, because you think company is kind of on the leading edge of this new ways of organizing, new systems of management. Typically are tech companies and people in Silicon Valley and startup world. Morningstar has been doing this for decades and does tomato processing. It's a very old school, non-technology driven company. But they are radically self-managing. Nobody has a boss. There are no managers in the company, and everybody decides for themselves what they do. One example of kind of like how far along they are in their commitment to self-managing. Everybody decides for themselves what they get paid. So they do self-set salaries. The way that salaries are decided is the company provides everybody with external market data about what is the market rate for a role or a position like the one that you're filling. And then the individual can go to a designated committee to get advice about compensation adjustments. So if you think that you deserve a raise, you go to this committee and you say, I think I deserve a raise, I've been doing really well, here's how I've been doing well, and they'll give you feedback on it and say, yep, you are doing really well, or maybe they'll say, no, you still have some work to do there, but still at the end of the day, it's up to you to set your salary, which is really, really cool, I think. But here's the other big piece. There's something called a colleague letter of understanding that they use at Morningstar, the CLOU, C-L-O-U, colleague letter of understanding. And it's very similar to how we were talking about documenting roles and ongoing expectations. The colleague letter of understanding does something similar. So each individual maintains this document that lists every single task that they're responsible for. And basically, the way that they think about it is, these are the kind of promises I've made to all the people that I work with. And you edit it, and like every quarter, you would go around to all the people that you work with, all the people who rely on you to get their work done, and you go over the list together and you say, this is what I'm promising to do for you. Are we on the same page? Literally, are we on the same page? Because we've written it down and made it explicit. Are we on the same page about it? And they do it, as far as I know, people that I've talked to, they do it in a relatively old school way. This is like an Excel sheet. It's not very pretty. It's not like beautifully enabled by software or user-friendly or anything like that. It's very practical, but it's very, very effective. And that idea of making our work and our expectations of each other explicit is a huge, huge piece of distributing authority, because what people worry about is if you just say to people, do whatever you think is best, there's a huge amount of trust that has to go along with that, right? And in most organizations, that trust it's not just innately there. It might be there if you're a 5-person startup team that all knows each other really well and has really strong personal ties to each other. Then you can just kind of rely on that underlying foundation. But in most organizations, most organizations of any significant scale, really anywhere over like 100 people or 150 people, those kind of automatic personal ties you can't rely on them to do the work of the trust that you need to build. So making our expectations of each other explicit is the way to enable that. So the third thing here, sociocracy. So sociocracy is this another kind of like system of self-governance. Has its roots in like 60s, 70s, like kind of counterculture, new age thinking, all this stuff. They're still around. Holacracy has taken a lot of their practices from sociocracy. And sociocracy is still around. They're still kind of promoting, sharing new thinking about practices for self-governance. One that I think is very useful, it's used in holacracy, it's used other places, is something called integrative decision-making. So integrative decision-making is something I would love to do a little demo of right now if we can get some volunteers. But it's a very specific and facilitated and structured way of a group making a collective decision together. And what's really cool about it is that once you're familiar with the practice, really any team can make any decision, big, complex, hard decisions, can arrive at a commitment to do something, a commitment to move things forward. And we've used it in extremely old school corporate environments. We've used it in the context of talking about bonuses for the executive level at a Fortune 100 company. We've talked about we've used it for doing reorganization plans for multi-billion-dollar businesses. You can really use it for all kinds of different things. So, are you guys interested? I would like 4 volunteers to do a demo of it. Great. And what we're going to talk about, I'm going to try to pick a topic that people hopefully have opinions about, but isn't make or break for the company. And I was thinking we could talk about something related to the food in this wonderful cafe that you have right here, that as just the topic. All right, so 2 of you come on down. You have, yeah, please. Just 2. Well, I just need 4 people, so yeah, 2 of you come on down. Or just one of you, that's fine. All right, that's great. Oh, yeah, so the mic, that's good. All right, so here, this is going to be weird. I'm going to act as facilitator. This is how we're going to do it. So the topic is going to be anything related to the food out there. We're going to get more specific in a second, but does one of you... Oh, everyone's qualified for it. It's fine. Oh, you're in charge of it. Oh, that'll be good. That's good. As long as you don't take anything personally.
I won't.
All right. So... that's good that you're in charge of it. So, so one of the basic rules is that there should be a facilitator, and the facilitator should not be the boss or the most senior person in the group. For this demo, I'll be the facilitator. And then 2, what we're going to need is one person to propose a change to what's in there. And it should, go ahead and use what you're interested in. But does one of you have just a thought about if it was up to you, what you would propose to change
Sure.
about what's in. And you don't tell us now, but do you have something?
Yep.
All right, great. So you will be the proposer.
Yep.
All right, so you're going to be the proposer, and then we're going to go around. There are going to be a couple rounds here. So we're going to start with a proposal. There'll be a round of what we call clarifying questions. Then there'll be a round of reactions, and then you will be able to edit or change your proposal, and then we'll do a round of integration or consent. All right, so again, I'm going to facilitate this. It's going to feel weird, definitely, but just go along with it. I'm going to stop you from having any crosstalk. I'm going to stop you from going off on any tangents. Yes. Yeah. Good. All right, so maybe that's something that you're already familiar with. All right, so we're going to start with the proposal. So what I'd like you to do is really briefly give whatever kind of context you think is relevant. This is why I think this, and then as succinctly as possible. By the way, we don't have a whiteboard or a flip chart handy, do we? Maybe just that blank sheet over there. Could somebody just carry that over and we can just put it on the wall here?
There's an A3 whiteboard. It has a
Yeah, if that one that's up there already, we can just move it over here. Oh, that's even better. All right, that's great. All right, so thank you so much. This is perfect. All right, so you're going to give us a little context and then describe as succinctly as possible what you propose. All right, take it away.
Okay. For a proposal is we always kind of have two sides for food served every day for lunch. There's kind of like the fancy thing that's different every day, whatever you want. And then if you don't like that, the fallback is always, always, always sandwiches and salad. My proposal is, hey, we have a really great grill out there. Something that's not as fancy but is great is I would love to have some hot dogs and hamburgers every once in a while.
Okay.
Let's put the grill to use out there.
So I'm just going to capture this here. Add hot dogs and hamburgers. No crosstalk. Hamburgers on grill to lunch rotation. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yep.
Rotation. All right. So writing it down is important here because when we discuss it, we all literally need to be on the same page about what exactly are we discussing, what exactly has been proposed. All right, so this is the proposal. Add hot dog and hamburgers on grill to lunch rotation. All right, so now we're going to do a round of clarifying questions. Each of you are going to have a turn. I emphasize clarifying questions, so this is just to make sure that you understand his proposal and resist the urge to add your own opinions about whether or not we should or should not do this. That'll happen next in the reaction round.
Should I respond to the question?
Yes, you should answer the questions, but try not to just answer the question.
Yep.
Right?
So, if you want hot dogs and hamburgers every day, am I reading that right? You want just hot dogs and hamburgers every day, the grill on every day?
I wouldn't assume every day necessarily, kind of thing.
Okay. Any other questions?
Not at this moment.
Okay. Yeah. Next.
So if the grill was on every day, would you imagine the grill being operated by the person that wants to use it, or would you imagine the grill being operated by one central person running the grill?
Back at the previous office, we used to have some grill masters who weren't necessarily the food service staff here, but I guess, I don't know if liability is an issue or anything like that, but maybe if people wanted to in the past, people have just been very keen to volunteer to be the grill master, kind of thing like that, which has worked out sometimes, I guess, but no real preference.
Okay.
Great. And by the way, another useful thing is if you don't have an answer to the question that's been asked, a valid answer is just unspecified.
Sure.
Although that was a great answer. Any other questions?
Maybe one other question is that will the food that's being cooked on it always be meat-based, or will it be vegetarian-based?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Besides hot dogs and hamburgers, I think it would be great to have vegetarian options as well.
Okay. Done.
Any other? All right, go ahead.
So do you see this as like a social event for everyone to be outside, or is it just the food's cooked and then we grab it from the line like any other day?
Good burgers have got to be fresh off the grill.
Any other questions? Great. All right. Good job. That was good. So reaction round, again, we're going to just go down the line, each of you in order. This is a time when you say, considering that this is the proposal, either it's a great idea or it's a horrible idea. If you have ideas about how it's not going to work or how it should be different, now is a great time to suggest what those edits may be. And if you want, or just listen carefully and try to think about, this is a place where you might take notes about like what you want to respond to or edit after you hear from each of them, right?
I think it's a great idea. I think once a week would be a great idea. My hesitations would be you would need a designated person to warm up the grill for an hour. You would need a designated person to be out there while it's warming up, so then you can turn it up. You need a designated person to clean it, to restock it, to make sure it has foil, to make sure it has briquettes. You'd also need a person to make sure to turn it off. So I don't see that being more than one person. So your ideas on who that would be, most likely me, but which could work. But I would be interested to hear your ideas there.
Okay, great. Anything else? No? All right.
Let's see, reaction. I'm thinking mainly from an ROI or efficiency perspective. Basically, all of the things that you're mentioning here, if you think about like the meals that were provided, it's a little bit of an ROI model of you invest a certain amount of money and time into preparing the food, employees consume it, potentially they go back to work earlier because they're just here and they go on. It's really easy just to get in line. So I'm concerned that if we do the grill too often, that we'll lose a little bit of the ROI of the food service that's being provided because of just the whole queuing nature of a grill and waiting in line and for it to warm up and someone staffing it. So I'm just thinking about it from an efficiency ROI perspective, if it makes sense to do it too frequently or if every once in a while is all right.
Okay, great.
So my immediate reaction was, what a great idea. Like Abby, I was started to question logistically how we might make this work. Obviously, it takes a little bit more effort and preparation.
Just speak closely to the mic.
Thank you. So I hope that we could maybe survey a larger audience and see if there's widespread interest in this so that we could justify the logistical needs.
All right. Now, back to you. So how would you like to amend this based on everything that you heard? Or not at all?
Okay, so I think people are looking at this as either like a binary, like, yes, it's permanently added to the rotation, or it's not. So maybe amend the proposal to be a trial, and from there meet and say what worked and what didn't work, and quickly iterate on what can we do better next time, or should we not go with that at all. That way, we don't necessarily have to have answers for all these on the first go. But if any one of these seems like a deal breaker, one trial isn't going to sufficiently ruin our efficiency, for instance.
And evaluate. All right, so I'm taking some license here as scribe or secretary, and I've, based on what I heard you say, amended this to say, try adding hot dog and hamburgers on grill to lunch once and review and evaluate how that went. So that's the new proposal. All right, so now last round. So here's how this is going to work. If anybody has evidence why doing this would cause immediate harm to the business right away, then speak up and we'll integrate your concern. And I phrased it that way because I'm deliberately pushing you guys to like strong bias to doing something, and especially because we've added it to like really narrow it down. So anybody have any evidence why adopting this would cause immediate harm? Yeah. And for now, if you do, then just give me like a word or a phrase that we'll put up here as like a placeholder for what that is. All right, previous experience.
Previous experiences.
Okay, and does anybody else have any? No? All right, so previous experience. All right, so now tell us what that is, and suggest a further amendment to this to integrate your concerns.
Earlier, Nick, you touched on previously we had Mozilla Grill Masters working the barbecue grill, and that worked out sometimes. Does that mean that sometimes it didn't work out? And in those instances, what happened?
No questions here. So is there something specific that you want to change about this? And
He's trying.
and to emphasize, you're more than welcome and encouraged to discuss and ask any of these questions as soon as we're done committing to the action.
Nothing I can change at the moment.
All right, great. So we are hereby resolved. We've made the decision about what to do, and thank you so much. That's the end. Thanks so much for participating. That was great. That was a good demo. Thanks, guys. All right, so obviously, like, kind of painfully structured, and I just want to emphasize that I have a huge amount of empathy for anyone who finds that experience, especially the first time you do it, to be painful. It was extremely painful the first time I did it with my team. I hated it. So a lot of sympathy for that. But once a team gets used to this, it's amazing how quickly you can process really, really big and complicated stuff. And one of the key things here is figuring out what's the version of the proposal that is safe to try right now, and zeroing it down to say, well, if we're really talking about what can we move forward immediately, it's a trial. Let's do it once and see what happens, and then let's talk about how it went. That's very reasonable and an easy thing for the team to commit to. And once you do this regularly, you start doing that with all your decisions. You just try to get down to all we need to agree on is what we should try right now. That's almost always the case. All right, so lastly, default to open. So default to open, kind of behind it, let me go back one sec. The thinking behind this is in a world where we are overflowing with information and data. There's so much useful information. It doesn't do any good, and in fact, it's counterproductive to try to have some centralized management of who should have access to which information. Who is going to be able to help or create value by having access to this particular kind of information? It's impossible to predict in most cases. So a better way to do it is just to default to allowing as many people as possible, as widely as possible, to have access to any information that they might find useful. And then people discover ways to create value from it. And that's kind of the central premise of open source software movement, right? Because you don't know who out there might be able to help you make the software better. So you just default to inviting everyone to try. So externally speaking, this can be, it gets a lot more complicated, and the security concerns around it can be very valid depending on the organization you're in. But even more importantly, it's about internal access to information. So one interesting example, our company, August, we're trying to take a really radical approach to this. We've actually created this site, public.aug.co. You can all go there now. If you're watching on the internet, you can go there now. It is a public Google Drive folder where we collect and make public a lot of information about our company, how we run it, our revenue, our equity structure, equity agreements, our approach to salary, how we do salary formulas, tools and toolkits about how we actually do our work, how we coach clients, IP about how we do that stuff, as much as possible. And there are a couple reasons for this. So one, it goes back to, it starts with purpose. Right? Our purpose at August is a capable team for every meaningful mission. That's what we're trying to do. If there's anybody out there in the world who wants to also do that and might find some of this information useful in helping to pursue that purpose, we want to encourage them, welcome them to do it. The other thing is that we want to learn faster. So our approach to salary is a good example. We took a lot of inspiration from a company called Buffer, some other companies out there who have been sharing new models for how to calculate compensation and salary. We've put our model out there in the hopes that other people will take it, copy it, and hopefully iterate on it, and then we can learn from what they've done and make ours better. So the last thing, I just want to share a couple more tools. So there are lots and lots of software tools that enable this kind of openness and information sharing within companies. Things like Google Drive are great examples, Box, Dropbox, Slack and HipChat, and those chat applications are also great examples of enabling this way of working. And I'm sure that there are dozens more that you guys are familiar with that I haven't even heard of. Four I want to call out specifically, so there are two related to holacracy and software for capturing your organization and the roles and the accountabilities within it. One is called GlassFrog. It's created by this company Holacracy One, which is the company behind Holacracy. There's a brand new one does a very similar thing called HolaSpirit. I also want to call out, especially as a software company, there's a huge opportunity for someone to come along and build software like this that is not holacracy, that serves many of the same needs and helps an organization to digitize itself and the roles and relationships and accountabilities within the organization without having to be practicing holacracy. So if that interests you and you have the skill set to do that, please go and do it, and I would love to talk to you about it if you're interested in that. Two other things. CoBudget is an interesting new tool that allows basically distributed budgeting and budget management within an organization, which is really cool. And Lumio is about a software tool for that kind of decision making, that kind of collaborative, integrative decision making, a software tool that enables that. Those are just a few. They're way more out there, and I encourage you to check them out, play with them, because software tools can really do a lot to enable this. So that's it. I'd love to open it up for questions now. Any questions? We can talk about anything you want related to this.
Mike, I'll start.
Yeah, please.
You say you default to open at public.og.co.
Yeah.
And you said as much as possible.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of what you did not make public?
Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing that we are not able to make public externally, outside of our company, we're a consulting firm. We don't make our clients' stuff public to other people. That's a really important thing. And as much as we are public externally, we are even way more public internally. CCing each other, BCCing each other on almost every external email that we send. We have Google groups set up for client delivery work, for business development work that everyone in the company has access to. We use Slack. We're huge Slack users, and all of our chats take place in public and open chat rooms instead of direct messages or private groups.
It's interesting you mentioned Buffer because I just read that article just yesterday. And I think I read where they have an email alias where every single email that's sent in the entire company gets copied to automatically. It's kind of a bizarre concept.
Yeah. So we're kind of doing something similar, although we try to categorize it a little bit. But yeah.
Questions? Anybody have any pressing kind of?
Yeah.
Just a disclaimer, I'm not in HR, but how do you deal with HR and personnel records?
Right.
And are you default to open in?
Yeah, so if we personally at August, we have the benefit of being a tiny little private company, so we're not subject to some of the more strict regulations regarding HR yet. As far as salary is one of the things that in most companies is usually most private, and we are starting from day one on having salaries completely transparent within the organization, and we're really, really strong believers in that. I'm a huge believer of that for many reasons, and I think it's way, way, way easier to do if you start that way from day one than to transition from a non-transparent salary situation to a transparent situation. But that's something that we definitely intend to keep open. And beyond that, I mean, I guess one question will be something like employee reviews is something that we might deal with at some point later on, and our starting point is going to be defaulting to open and having that information. It's going to be hard to do because we want to create an environment where people give really constructive and honest feedback to each other, and making that kind of feedback public might be a deterrent for that. But I'm hopeful that maybe we can, with culture and with behavior, that we can kind of balance those pieces.
So you don't have any restrictions with HIPAA protected information on medical backgrounds and illnesses and disabilities, gender.
I mean, I'm sure that we will be respectful of everything that is legal, that we're legally obligated to do. But yeah, again, fortunately, because we're small and we're new, we haven't run into many of those issues yet. Yeah.
Is there a large organization that you feel best exemplifies some of these principles?
Yeah, so probably, and this may seem like a cop-out, but it's not. Probably the best example of a large organization that's doing this well is Google. Google is really at the forefront of a lot of these practices, and that is not at all to say that they've gotten it right or that they've gotten it perfect. Plenty of things that they're still working on and plenty of things that aren't working for them, but they are one of the best and biggest examples. There are companies that we worked with at my former company, Undercurrent, large old companies, PepsiCo, GE, both included. These are huge international and old, relatively old companies. GE has over 300,000 employees all over the world. And both of these companies are making significant strides in moving in this direction. It looks a lot different for them, and they're not nearly at the kind of extreme end of this, but they are, relative to how they've been in the past, relative to many other big Fortune 500 companies, they really are pretty far along on this path.
So,
yeah.
Maybe you just answered part of this, but in terms of an organization do you know of an organization of any substantive size, like beyond initial startup size, that's done the transparent salary thing or moved from closed to transparent in that space?
I haven't heard of anyone moving from closed to transparent at a significant size. There are like some
my HR hat on. I'm like,
yeah.
Whoa.
There are some mid-sized companies. Like there is a story that was on like NPR or some like Money Talks or one of those podcasts or something. Okay, yeah, and there's a British company who transitioned, like a manufacturing company who transitioned from not transparent to transparent.
It's really interesting. Second part, and then I'm done. In an organization that does stuff like copy all emails to an alias, make everything super public, do you think it eliminates the catty backchat, for lack of a better way to put that, the backchat, or do you think that the backchat just moves to another channel?
Yeah, I mean, like whether or not there's catty, backchat, I think that's primarily dependent on culture. And I think if you, again, when you're starting this way, then that permeates the culture and kind of guides the culture. And I do think it counteracts that kind of behavior. But If you're switching over to it, then that stuff is still going to be there as long as the culture is still that way, I think. Yeah.
Any questions on distributing authority as we move into one of the other categories that Mike has talked about? Any reflections on what we're doing at Mozilla or what we should be doing on distributing authority? Anything out in Paris, London, or Berlin, feel free. IRC? I knew Chris would have a question on that.
All right, so are you familiar with the butterfly effect in chaos theory?
Sure, yeah. That a small thing that happens somewhere can have a big effect later on somewhere else.
In many organizations, given that organizations are people, that chaos reigns in almost any organization. Mm-hmm. Do you see these principles as helping kind of like rein in chaos, or at least to like pick away at the chaos to understand like what is like the root causes of how this particular issue that you're dealing with has started?
Yeah, no, this is directly related to that, and the way that I think about it is in terms of adaptivity. So that's why I go back to that certainty, certain, or predictable and unpredictable. In most organizations, most work that's done today, it is impossible to predict what's going to happen, and therefore defaulting to extensive and detailed planning is really problematic, and you waste a lot of time, and the plans are useless as soon as you're done with them because things change, and things are always changing. So all of this, there's a huge amount of overlap between these principles, this thinking, and complex adaptive systems theory, how organizations like biological organisms, ant colonies, that kind of stuff, how they adapt to their environments. Sharing of information, frequent experimentation and learning and adopting what's working, and scaling that, spreading what's working quickly, are all principles of adaptivity.
I like the concept of Mozilla being a giant ant colony. I think we should think about that.
I mean, in some ways you are, and certainly with the open source community.
We'll have to show the movie Ant-Man at Orlando. Other questions? Anything on designing for networks and the concepts of really documenting everything on basically a wiki, I guess, and making it editable. That's where we started at Mozilla, and we've kind of tried different techniques of intranets, manas. We haven't chosen one system, but when we have been on one system, it really is great.
And I do want to emphasize that exercise of defining and documenting roles and accountabilities, it feels very tedious the first time you do it, and it's hard to appreciate why you're doing it, what the value is going to be from it. The value comes once it's already been done and you're able to go back to it on a regular basis, every month or every couple months, and over a year you've edited it 5-6 times, and how easy it is to change it and evolve it, and to have this reference point when you're talking about, hey, no one is doing that thing that needs to get done. Oh, well, we haven't told anyone to do it. It's no one's accountability, so of course it's not getting done.
So Abby, we're going to add the grill thing to your document. Mike,
and that's actually, there is one more really, really valuable thing about that documentation, is what you were just saying, that like one of the things that becomes revealed is, oh shit, this one person is filling like 10 roles in 6 different circles, and no wonder they can't get anything done. They've got way, 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 way too much on their plate, and maybe we need to hire another person to help them out. So that stuff gets revealed.
Mike, that was awesome. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone on the internet, everyone who tuned in.
Oh, we have a small gift for you.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for coming to a place where we like to think we work in the open, but we always have more to learn. So take a little bit of Mozilla back with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. Very cool.
Oh, and tune in next month if you're not here. Stream, January 14th. Ideals over ideology. More to come in your email.
Thank you. Thank you.